Hello and welcome to Ask the Expert Anything, our special segment of the RinggitPlus show where you ask our experts anything. So in this episode, we have Azril. Azril, how are you doing?
I'm good. Hi, Pang.
Okay. So I know this for this episode, we're going to be talking about something that's quite close to you as well, and that is to child planning, right? That is on child planning, right? Just to give a little bit more context, I know a lot of friends who have children already. I'm quite old, sadly, but I do know quite a number of them who some of them have laid out like a really great solid financial plan for their child, right down from like prenatal care all the way down to like what they're gonna do, where they're gonna study overseas or locally and stuff like that. It's really comprehensive. But I also do know people who don't yet have that same level of preparedness, or don't really have that considerations, right? Like when they have a child, the amount and the costs involved with having a child can actually change circumstances quite significantly, right? I think this is a pretty interesting subject, and we have Azril obviously with you as a licensed financial planner. Can talk us through some of the big things that we need to ask ourselves, and how can we better prepare ourselves for, especially for couples who are looking to have children, one, two, doesn't matter. It's down to the considerations, right? And Azril, I know you have some questions as well that you get from your clients, and you've put them into your slides. So I'm just gonna let you take it away.
Thanks, Pang. So this is a topic that is of interest to me, especially more so recently as I'm expecting to have a
Nice.
child soon in a
Congrats,
couple of more
congrats.
months' time. Thank you. And yeah, what I attempt to do throughout the short presentation is to be able to cover some of the key questions and considerations that you need to put in place when you're thinking about planning for a child, particularly with regards to the costs that will be involved, and the investments assets that you can make to be able to plan for it, because it can be very substantial. So the first kind of key questions, right? So why do you need to think about planning for a child? Right? And I think that's kind of the questions that everyone would have in the first looking at this topic, right? And the considerations around that is that it is oftentimes more costly than what you think, right?
That's true.
Oftentimes, when we grow up, like for example, we tend to think that will be the cost that will be associated to our own child. But unfortunately, there has been significant increase in child care, right? Particularly around education, and how education inflation is significantly higher than it used to be, right? So as a result, when we take all the costs into consideration, it can easily add up to 200,000 to a million, 1.1 million per child, right? Which is very much, of course, dependent on your aspirations and expectations for your kid, right? In terms of the level of education that you expected to have, as well as the level of comfort that you would want them to have from
Yeah.
a childcare perspective. So that is kind of the key message here, which is that, you need to have a couple 100,000 easily over time to be able to support that, right? And relying entirely on your salary may not be enough, right? And let's go through some of the key misconceptions that people have around planning for a child. The first being that if you're in your 20s and 30s and you are not yet married, for example, or just recently married, and you're thinking, well, this is far too into the future for me. I will show you later that it's better for you to start earlier, actually, even at the
Mhm.
point when you do yet have a child, because you could get your investments assets to be compounded over time.
A head
And number
start,
two is
basically.
yeah, and even in an instance whereby you might not need to use the funds if your kids are on
That's true.
scholarship, for example, or get loans from the government, then you can actually use that funds for other purposes such as retirement. But the idea here is to have some backup plan, right? That in the instance whereby they're less fortunate or they're less smart, then you might be able to fork out your own cash for their education, right?
Right.
And there's also misconception around SSPN, right? And that SSPN is in itself is enough. Well, unfortunately, it is not, right? Because and especially if you're just looking at it from a tax planning perspective, because you can only get tax relief up until 8,000 ringgit per year. So over a period of 20 years, that would not be sufficient to the numbers that we've reflected earlier. So that's why it's important to think about other assets beyond SSPN. The third is around the living at the present YOLO kind of attitude versus investing for the future. So that is also another misconception, which is that you have to just spend everything that you have today and not plan ahead for the future. And that's not your responsibility. That's your own children's responsibility. I think it's important to think about uh, planning ahead and putting some portion. It doesn't have to be substantial. We'll see that later.
Yep.
It's just a small portion of your savings. And then the misconception myths around the government having to have a secured seat for my child at the point of them reaching university. This is going to be, of course, another challenge too, because there's no such thing as security at public universities. So therefore, it's important for you to look at other options as well at private universities. That comes at a cost. So therefore, you
Yep.
have to think about what those amount is going to be. So why is it important to plan financially for a child? Well, there is kind of a framework that I would like to introduce here around the kind of 3 stages of children's development and the cost that you need to take into account. Well, what I see happening and most of the clients doing, making a mistake around this is the fact that uh, they do not have funds sufficient for the final stage, which is stage 3 or
Mm.
tertiary adulthood. Right, most people are able to afford the cost to the stage 1 of preborn to newborn, as well as the stage 2 kindergarten, primary and secondary, because this is somewhat manageable, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's you're not looking at giving a luxurious life for your children. This is something that you can afford with your own income. But what I see most people making mistakes on is that they have not taken into account of the cost that need to be incurred at the point when their children reach tertiary education, because that amount can be substantial. So a tuition fee for
Yes.
university, for example,
Oh.
can be a couple of 100,000 ringgit. So
Mhm.
let's look at what that is, right? Because that is a key component. So how much do you need to save when we talked about children's tertiary education? So here is a rule of thumb guide that we would like to share that showcases the kind of amount that you need to accumulate at the point when your children becomes eligible to join these universities, right? So if it's a local public university, that amount can be less than 300,000. So of course, this again depends on the location, whether it's in the urban area versus rural. For example, the cost of
Mhm.
living would differ significantly. And the difference between, so for example, private university in Malaysia versus private universities overseas. So here you see the amount increasing, right? So if you go to local private university, the amount increasing. And if you're looking at overseas universities, especially the foreign private ones, this can reach up to 1 million actually, right? We've seen many cases, especially in the US. If you study 4 years in the US, and
Yep.
the cost of living in major cities in the US, right? Um, and what I would like to share also is a sense of how much savings you need, right, on per month basis for a period of 20 years. So it's actually not that substantial if you are able to plan ahead. Right? So that's the key message. So if
20
you're able to
years
plan
ahead.
ahead, yeah, 20 years ahead. Well, you can afford an overseas education with just 800 ringgit per month, right? And that's less overwhelming when you compare the
It's
total
true.
amount, right? So that's the key message here, right? But the important thing here is to also ensure that you're able to invest into growth assets, right? Growth assets such that you have long-term time horizon that is able to withstand the risk that you take, while at the same time able to give you 9% return over time, right? So this is the key message here. And where can you invest this, right? So that's the key questions that you have now. Well, now I know that I need 500,000 at least, right, for my children's education. So what do I do, Azril? So that's the natural question that you would have. Well, a couple of things that you can do, and we'll see a little bit more around the investment assets that you can make. One is the consideration around, okay, how many children that you want to have.
Yeah.
This is a conversation that most people don't want to have. Uh, uh, Even I'm surprised. Some even after a few years of marriage have not even decided on a number yet. So to me, this is a conversation that you can have. It doesn't have to be fake. So at least you know a range, right? It cannot be that your spouse wants more than 5 and you want less than 2, right? So there's a massive mismatch there between what you want and what your partner wants. So
Yeah.
so that's something that you need to decide early on, so that you have a sense as to what that cost is going to be, because it's substantial, right? Having less than 2 versus having 5 children, it's a big difference, right, over time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like if you're looking at 500,000 for one, then every child that you have is another 500,000, and that's from 800 ringgit a month savings, it jumps to 1,600, 2,004, and then it becomes a pretty big number after that. Yeah.
All right. So yeah. So absolutely right there. So therefore, looked at what that number is, and so that you can see what that amount is. Right. Then the next steps is to look at investing. Right. So here we will look at some opportunities later. And finally, and if you are especially on a higher tax bracket income, it's actually worthwhile for you to put in a portion into SSPN, right? 8,000, not the total amount, 8,000, for example, and enjoy instant tax relief, right? Because if you're on 20 to 25% tax bracket, then effectively you're getting 20% return immediately from that
8,000.
investments, right?
Mhm.
So then the question is, okay, where can I invest, right? So let's look at some of that framework that I would like to introduce here. So you got to be able to look at a return that is net 9%, right? So that's the first thing. So when we talked about the framework here, so make sure your return is 9% on a net basis after taking into account of the cost. So cost here can include your one-off cost and as well as your recurring cost. Next is to look at the drivers. What are the key drivers of these investments? It has to be for the purpose of growth, and it's meant to be for the purpose of long term. And you don't need to have these investments, as said, to be necessarily very liquid, because you don't need to withdraw this until the point when you need it, right? So that's the kind of framework that I would use. And which investments assets that can give you this kind of return of 9%? Well, in our mind, there are 3 options that you can choose. And this can be robo advisors at the lowest cost, and you have to choose aggressive funds here to be able to make a return that's more than 9%. And when you looked at funds and stocks that you like to invest individually, then you can also be able to get that 9% return, subject to additional higher fee, right, of the management fee that you need to pay, because this is on an active management basis versus the passive management that we see in robo advisors. And of course, if you need a human support, then you can speak to a unit trust or insurance agent that can also give you these 9% growth assets, but at a higher fee, right? You often have to pay 5 to 20% sales fee for this.
Oh, 5 to 20%.
Yeah. So it can be quite substantial. So your net return here of 9% would require the fund to be at 15%, right? Because you have to pay the 6% to the agent. So you got to make sure that you're selecting the right fund. And there's going to be expected volatility to this. So there may be times when your return is negative, but the idea here is you should hold on to this, because this is meant to be more than 15 to 20
long-term horizons. Yeah.
investment
horizons. That's cool. That's super interesting. Sharing, Azril, because I think a lot of people, it looks like even like you can plan at maybe 1 or 2 years before your child is born, and you still have the financial resources for them to go through their education all the way up to the tertiary level, just with some active savings and going through these investment vehicles over the long term, right?
Yeah. So I can start it immediately, and then I think that's what I do personally myself too. Thinking ahead when I'm having my children soon, is to be able to already start this. And what I also think helps is to create what I call a pigeonhole method investment, where you dedicate specific fund for specific purposes, so that you don't commingle that with your other objectives, such as retirement, for example, that can commingle. And the beauty to this is that this is meant to be a backup, right? So if in the instance whereby your children are fortunate enough to get scholarship, you can use this to do
extra money, right?
Yeah, your house next to the beach, or whatever it is that you will hope to achieve, right, at the point when you reach that retirement age.
Nice.
But if you think that whatever that I'm sharing here is not adequate from a DIY perspective, of course, what you can do is you can speak to us, um,
That's true.
and and be able to get a personalized advice on this, and, uh, and, 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 and be able to map out the actual financial positions that you have with the objectives that you would like to achieve.
That's true. So yeah, just speaking of what Azrael's picking up what Azrael's just shared, Azrael's is obviously a licensed financial planner, and he is also an Islamic financial planner who will be able to provide some framework or give you the stepping stones to kind of build your financial position towards meeting any of your financial goals, whether that's for retirement or even for having children, obviously, or both at the same time, right, Azrael? So, for everyone who wants to know more about how a licensed financial planner works, and if you're interested in engaging with one, there's always RinggitPlus Financial Planner, right? You can scan the QR code to find out more about our one-to-one financial planning service. And RinggitPlus Advance is RinggitPlus Advance. Sorry, we renamed it quite a while ago because it's a lot more catchier these days. To have RinggitPlus Financial Planner, right? Like it's a little bit more straightforward. You engage with a licensed financial planner, and thanks to our automation and our technology in the back end, we are able to provide these services at a much affordable rate compared to to everyone else in the industry. So, if you want to know more, scan the QR code, and well, if you want to reserve a spot immediately, right? So no, really, thanks so much for sharing this slides, Azrael, because I know this comes from your own personal experience, and that should give people some idea, especially for those who are thinking about having children. The cost is actually pretty substantial, and but at the same time, if you are serious about it, and it looks like it is quite attainable to be able to provide for your child or children from all the way from before they are born all the way to their higher education, regardless of whether they're going to be studying locally or abroad. So thanks again, Azrael. I'll catch you in another episode for sure. And congrats again for your child, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay. And for everyone else, I'll see you guys in the next episode with another financial planner. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.